We're wrapping up the bye week with Ed Valentine of Big Blue View coming up next on the LockedOn Giants podcast.
You are Locked On Giants, your daily New York Giants podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, New York Giant fans, and welcome to another edition of the LockedOn Giants podcast, part of the LockedOn Podcast family, your team every day. Patricia Traina here with you, and we have Ed Valentine of Big Blue View. He is joining me, good friend, longtime friend, go back a number of years, and we are going to talk a little bit about the state of the Giants, kind of getting different opinions this week about the state of the Giants, where they are, where they're headed, and so on and so forth. So, Ed, first, let me welcome you to the show.
Hey, thanks for having me. As always, Patty, it's always fun to talk with you.
Let's talk about the Giants, Ed. I mean, 3-6 right now. They've been starting to play a little bit better. Is there hope to think that that will continue, or do you think it's just been a case of once in a while they get lucky and, then they go right back to what they were?
Well, I think there's hope. I think what we've seen the last 6 weeks, we saw, 3-3 record. I think that's probably more representative of what the Giants probably are, is somewhere around a 500 level football team, than what we saw the first 3 weeks. So I guess hope is a relative word, but I think what we've seen lately is probably more in line with what we'll see the rest of the way, especially since the schedule isn't as daunting the rest of the way.
Now, every year when the bye week comes up, coaching staffs always talk about self-scouting. What can we do better? What do we keep the same? So on and so forth. If you were leading the self-scouting part of the exercise, what are some of the things that you've liked so far from the Giants that you've seen? What are some of the things that you don't like and you feel you need to be changed moving forward?
Well, Patty, I sort of feel like, you mentioned golf a minute ago, and I sort of feel like you just kind of teed me up here a little bit, because anyone that listens to my podcast, the Valentine's Views podcast, or reads what I do at Big Blue View knows how I feel about Joe Judge's comment this week about self-scouting. And I think that self-scouting for the New York Giants and for Joe Judge has to start with Joe Judge looking at Joe Judge. Because for me, I like Joe Judge. I think that Joe is going to be back with the Giants next season. I still believe that Joe Judge can be a good NFL head coach. Hasn't won enough games, so far in a year and a half. But I think that a lot of what has gone wrong with the New York Giants this season falls at the feet of Joe Judge. From his fourth down conservative ways, to some of the other in-game management, some of the confusion that we've seen during games. I think a lot of it lands at the feet of Joe. I mean, it's hard other than Joe. It's hard to say, well, I've liked this, I haven't liked that, because on the offensive side of the ball, we've seen so many injuries. You never know what you're seeing week to week. And I don't think we've seen the offense the Giants wanted all season, and we're finally starting to see the defense we thought we'd see. But for me, self-scout to me starts with Joe Judge looking in the mirror and assessing his own culpability for the Giants being 3-6.
Yeah, I think that's a good place to start. Obviously, I would think Joe's asking everybody to look in the mirror, not just himself, not just the players, the assistant coaches. Everybody has to look in the mirror. What can they do better? And, Joe, for his, to credit Joe, he's not oblivious, I think, to, the things to his shortcomings. He won't come right out, I guess, and say it, but you can kind of tell if you read between the lines that he's not oblivious, that he knows that there are things he can do better. And, it's not a case of, like we saw a few years ago where the coach threw the team under the bus and it was their fault that they weren't winning because, the coaches were calling such a perfect game plan.
Well, Joe is still, and I think people forget this, but Joe is still a young head coach. He's still a guy who got a head coaching job before most people thought that he would, probably before he even thought that he would. He's still a 39-year-old guy in his first head coaching stint. And I think he's a smart guy. I think he relates really well to players. People from the outside who aren't around the Giants as much as you are, as much as I am, I think people get the idea that he's hard on players, that he's a slave driver, that players are going to naturally dislike him. And I don't think that's the case. I think that, Joe's also well-trained, having worked for Bill Belichick, having worked for Nick Saban. He understands football better than I ever will. And yet I think you come back to the fact that he still is a very young head coach. You have to learn from the things that don't go well. You can't be stubborn. Going back to Ben McAdoo, I think you and I used to talk about this all the time. Ben McAdoo was stubborn to the point of he knew one way, he knew one philosophy, he believed in himself. He really didn't want to hear opinions from anybody else. He really didn't want to change. And for me, that cost him. I think that Joe is smart enough not to follow down that road. I hope he's smart enough not to follow down that road, because I seriously, I do believe, that he has the potential to be a very good head coach for a long time.
All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's LockedOn Giants podcast. But first, I want to tell you about a simple way to get all the entertainment you love without the hassle. DirecTV Stream brings you your live TV and on-demand favorites together like never before, which means you can watch your favorite sports, movies, and shows all in one place. And best of all, there is no annual contract, nor is there any need to buy any extra devices or have multiple remote controls. DirecTV Stream allows you to get your TV together. Learn more at directtv.com. That's directtv.com. Now, Ed, let's talk about the offense in particular. We see glimpses of things that they can do. All right. We saw, for example, Jason Garrett finally deploying Evan Ingram the proper way, not asking him to block defensive ends, but having him block smaller guys, sending him up the seam. The running game did well last week against the Raiders. They're still missing pieces, and the offensive line is still probably not where they want it to be. That said, what do you anticipate will be different with the offense moving forward?
Well, I think you hit on something, Patty. The way that the Giants used the tight ends the last couple of weeks is, I think, what we've hoped for all season long. A little bit more of Evan Ingram split off the line of scrimmage, getting him down the field some. The 30-yard touchdown pass was a matchup and the kind of play that we've wanted to see, more from Evan Ingram, forever. The passes to Kyle Rudolph, it was nice to see them get him involved. I think what we're going to see from the Giants offense largely depends on how healthy it is, Patty. I think that it would really be nice to see, even for a 4 or 5 game stretch this season, what the Giants can do if they can get all of their pieces healthy at the same time. If they can get Saquon Barkley on the field, if they can get Kenny Golladay fully healthy, if they can get Kadarius Toney fully healthy, get Sterling Shepard, to stay on the field for more than a game or two at a time. It would be nice to see what Jason Garrett can do if he's got those pieces at his disposal. The thing the Giants aren't going to be able to do much about at this point in time is the offensive line. I think you and I both know that as much as people want to gnash their teeth and criticize Jason Garrett, and there are times when I shake my head at certain play calls. I couldn't believe the other day that they wasted a trick play on a 3rd and 17. Just not the right time to waste a trick play, especially I think the cat's out of the bag at this point. Everybody in the league knows that sooner or later the Giants are going to try to ask Kadarius Toney to throw a pass during a game. So, that one is kind of becoming obvious, but you're not going to be able to do a whole lot about the offensive line at this point. And I think people need to understand that a lot of the conservatism, a lot of the quick throw, a lot of the fact that the ball's not getting down the field is because the Giants are working around an offensive line that probably can't give them enough time to do that at this point, or not, at least not consistently. So I'm hoping to see better. I would like to see a stretch of time, where guys are at least healthy, so we see what this offense was supposed to look like to begin with. But I'm certainly not expecting the Giants all of a sudden to morph into a wonderful offense of some sort. I'll settle for league average, Patty.
Better than nothing for sure. But, sticking with the offense here, let's talk about Daniel Jones, because this was supposed to be a big year for him. They were looking for, or I don't know if the Giants per se, but I know people on the outside were hoping that Daniel Jones would take that Josh Allen type leap that Josh Allen took in year 3. Daniel hasn't quite done that, but he's made some progress. When you look at Daniel, do you still have questions about him as the future of this franchise, or are these questions starting to be answered for you?
Well, I think they're starting to be answered, Patty. The question, the big question is, how good can he actually be? Is he a middle tier quarterback? Is he a guy that's Andy Dalton in his prime, or can he be, a top 10, top 12 kind of quarterback? And to be fair, I don't think he's had a legitimate opportunity this year to answer that question because of what he's been working with. I do think you're right. He's shown some improvement. He still has the habit on occasion of staring down a receiver, which he did against Kansas City, which he's done on a couple of occasions this year that have led to interceptions. And obviously he's not putting up huge numbers in terms of touchdowns and yardage and all that, but a lot of that's what he's working with. For me, I think he's shown enough that he's your quarterback next season. I don't think there's anyone in the draft that's worth using a top half of the first round pick on. I don't think the Giants are going to have the cap space to go out and swing a deal for a big name, highly paid veteran player. So he's your quarterback next year. And just Giants fans that aren't happy about that are just going to have to deal with it because he's the guy, and I'm okay with it. I think he's a good quarterback. The only question for me is how good, and I don't think that the supporting cast around him has enabled us to answer that question yet.
Yeah, the injuries haven't helped either, because it's hard when you have a different lineup week after week after week. Now, the Giants will probably pick up Daniel Jones's 5th-year option, which a decision has to be made by next May. I mean, I'd be surprised if they don't. Let's talk about another guy, though, who's coming to the end of his rookie deal, and that's Saquon Barkley. Now, the Giants have already picked up his 5th-year option, so next year he will be back actually on a lower cap number. I think it's something like 7 million or a little high, a little more than 7 million as opposed to the 10 million he counts for this year. That was a no-brainer. Would you agree that next year is a make or break season for Saquon Barkley, not just in terms of performance, but in terms of staying on the field?
Absolutely, Patty. Absolutely. When you think about Saquon Barkley, I have always written every time I've had to break myself of this habit, actually. I've always written star running back Saquon Barkley. And no offense to Saquon, but I have stopped writing star running back Saquon Barkley because the truth of the matter is Saquon Barkley has not given a star performance since 2018. You have to be on the football field to give star performance. And Saquon Barkley has now missed games with leg injuries, which is a significant thing to remember when you're talking about a running back. It's not just a shoulder injury or a broken bone, a broken forearm that knocked CJ Board out for the season. This is 3 consecutive seasons he's missed games with leg injuries as a running back. He's played 7 games in the last 25 Giants games. He has to prove that he can stay on the field. He has to prove that he's something close to what he was in 2018. Otherwise, as much as the organization loves him, as much as John Mara would love for him to be a Giant for 5, 6, 7 more years, how can you possibly justify giving Saquon Barkley a big, a rich second contract? I just don't know how you can if he doesn't give you a healthy, quality season in 2022.
The answer is you can't. It would be cap suicide. Even with the cap set to go up in 2023, that's when the TV deal, the windfall from the TV deals kicks in. So, but the answer in short is you absolutely can't. You need I agree with you. You need for Barkley to be on the field and show that he can be that guy. Otherwise, right now it's money down the toilet. I mean, and Lord knows his team has thrown some money down the toilet before.
Yeah, they have, Patty, and you're absolutely right. I mean, I like Saquon. I think he's, I think he tries to represent the franchise in the right way. I do think he works hard. You can't blame a guy for getting injured and all of that, but running backs have a short shelf life to begin with, which is why it was always a gamble to take him in the draft when the Giants took him at number 2 overall. And you just can't, you can't tie up that kind of money in a guy that isn't getting on the field. I mean, we're seeing that in Carolina with Christian McCaffrey. We saw it, in with the Los Angeles Rams with Todd Gurley. Second contracts to running backs that these franchises probably regret now. So you can't go down that road if the performance and the health don't indicate that you're not throwing money away.
All right, Giant fans, still more to come on today's program. But first, have you checked out Built Bar? Available in 9 amazing flavors, plus a rotating selection of limited time offerings in nut and nut-free varieties. Built Bar is the perfect choice for a low-carb, low-sugar, and high-protein treat that will satisfy your sweet tooth. Visit BuiltBar.com and get 15% off your first order with the promo code LOCKED15. That's LOCKED 15 at BuiltBar.com for 15% off your first order. All right, Giant fans, we have more coming up on today's show. But first, Bet Online is back bigger and better than ever before, offering a new web interface for the start of basketball season and more props, odds, and lines than ever before. Bet Online remains your number 1 spot for all basketball and football action this season. Head on over to their updated mobile or desktop site and sign up today using our special promo code LOCKEDON. You will get a 50% welcome bonus on your first deposit with that promo code. Again, that's Locked On. Whether it's football, basketball, NHL, Vegas games, UCF, whatever your favorite sports are, BetOnline has all the information you need to make your bets. So head on over, use our special promo code Locked On, and get in the game today. That's betonline.ag, where the game begins. Ed, let's talk about the defense, because to me, I suspect there's going to be some changes on that defensive side of the ball in the personnel. We've got to start, I think, with the edge rushers. You have Lorenzo Carter is in a contract year, hasn't really done a whole lot. O'Shane Ximenez just got benched last week. He hasn't done a lot. And I know Joe Judge said, well, it's about personnel. And just because a guy was put down doesn't mean he's done. I mean, come on, we can look at the production here and we can kind of figure certain things out. To me, the edge rusher class, I mean, do they have their answers in Azeez Ojulari, Quincy Roche? It looks like it, but if you had to put money down right now, would you say that Ximenez and Carter are on this roster next year?
Absolutely not, Patty, but has not been a productive player. You could tell going back to his rookie year, the Pat Shurmur, James Betcher coaching staff began to tire of him, or began to be disenchanted with him, because if you remember his playing time, even in a rookie season when he had 4.5 sacks, the Giants weren't winning, and yet his playing time dwindled as the season went along. Last season, I thought that Ximenez was a player who had lost or maybe never gained the confidence of this coaching staff. And I see the same thing this year. I think him being a healthy scratch last week was a clear indication that this coaching staff is moving away from him and is moving toward Azeez Ojulari, Quincy Roche. Eventually, I think in the second half of the season, we'll see some of Ellerson Smith, and hopefully for Giants fans, hopefully he shows at least some flashes of pass rush potential. I don't think it's fair to expect a ton from Ellerson Smith the rest of the season. I mean, this is a guy who didn't play for his college team a year ago because the season was canceled because of COVID-19. He missed the first half of this season, so I don't think we can expect a ton of production. I think what you want from him are flashes of potential, but I think Ximenez is a guy who's going to be moving on after this year. You mentioned Lorenzo Carter. Lorenzo Carter is a guy who's a terrific athlete. Again, another good guy, all of that. But Lorenzo Carter is a guy who's probably an average player, or has been an average player for the Giants. He's not a guy. He's a free agent at the end of this year. He's not a guy you can give a big second contract to. He just isn't. So my expectation is the Giants let him move on and see if someone else can bring better play out of Lorenzo Carter. The Giants have tried for long enough.
All right, now I'm going to probably surprise a few people with this next question, so bear with me here. But could you potentially see the Giants moving on from James Bradberry next year?
Absolutely, Patty. I would not have been shocked had they moved on from Bradberry at the trade deadline. Let's be realistic. James Bradberry, I don't have the cap figures in front of me. I think he carries something like, and you might have it in front of you, but I think he carries something like a $13 million cap hit next year. James Bradberry was terrific for the New York Giants last year. James Bradberry has not really been all that good this year. That's the reality of it. Bradberry has not been that good. I was actually looking at the statistics on Thursday morning, and I don't have them all in front of me, but James Bradberry has missed 26% of his tackles this season. He got torched by Terry McLaurin. He got torched the other day by Hunter Renfrow. He got he admitted clearly when he was matched up with Zay Jones. I mean, we're talking about Zay Jones. He admitted clearly that he got beaten and that Xavier McKinney saved him on what would have been a long pass the other day. James Bradberry has not played to his contract this year. And the thing about Bradberry is he's not a tremendous athlete. He's not one of those guys with overwhelming athleticism and all of that. I think so. So yeah, I'm with you, Patty. It wouldn't shock me. You know the cap situation that the Giants are facing better than I do. I know it's not good. I know that they're going to have to make some decisions, and it wouldn't surprise me at all if moving on from James Bradberry is one of the decisions that they end up making.
And I did pull up the numbers for those wondering. James Bradberry has okay, sit down now. Make sure, well, you're sitting, Ed, but everybody out there, if you're standing up, sit down. James Bradberry has a $21.86 million cap figure for 2022. He also has, let me see, on March 18th, $2 million of his base salary is guaranteed. And I believe his base salary, let me see if I can get that number here because I'm looking at it on my phone. I want to say his base salary is something like 13 something or other. So if they do move on from him and they make him a pre-June 1st cut, they look to save $12.136 million with a 9.7 dead money hit. That's a nice little chunk of change considering this team right now, if the salary cap is projected, I think it's like projected 208.2 million for next year. The Giants don't even have enough right now to sign their draft class, let alone redo any contracts or anything like that. They're going to have to clear money out.
I think they're projected to be like $8 million over at this point. Mm-hmm. And the fact of the matter is James Bradberry cannot be a New York Giant at that number. He just can't.
Nope. And you can't redo the contract. You keep that. See, that's the other problem. The Giants basically maxed out the number of contracts, I think, that they restructured. They can't do it anymore. Otherwise, they're going to put themselves in cap hell for an eternity. They're already in cap hell for next year in trying to squeeze out every last drop that they can of the cap. I mean, recently they redid part of Graham Gano's contract. I think they converted half of his what's left of his base salary. I think they converted that into a signing bonus in order to get them through the rest of the year because they just don't have enough money. And to me, that's a big, big problem. And that leads me to my next question.
I was just going to say before you get to that one, Patty, when you're restructuring contracts to squeeze out like $300,000 for the rest of the year, that tells you just how bad the cap situation really is. And I understood what the Giants did this past offseason. I really did. You know, they're in a situation where they had to try something, but they knew. You know, we talked to Kevin Abrams about this before the season started. They knew that they had put themselves in a difficult situation going forward after this year. And we'll see. I mean, we'll see just how bad it turns out to be, but it's going to cost them, you know, probably going to cost them a player like Bradberry. And it's most certainly going to keep them out of the market for top tier free agents next offseason.
Absolutely. And again, this is a series I'm doing over on Giants Country. And on Friday, I'm going to have the segment about the salary cap because it is a mess. It is an absolute mess. And I understood what the Giants were trying to do as well. I mean, they basically, in a nutshell, the 2018 draft for that team there were a lot of mistakes made in retrospect. Because I think they tried to accommodate and keep Eli Manning afloat, thinking maybe they can make an extra run. 2019, that class is better, but still not great. Looks like the 20 and 21 classes, they finally got on track there. But at that point, you had to, you know, if ownership is saying, well, you've got to produce more wins, you have to do something radical. And that radical thing was to go back and hit free agency hard, which is what they did. And it didn't work in 2014. It didn't really work in 2016. Why they thought it would work now, I have no idea. But it was, hey, listen, it was the only thing they could try. So I get that. All right. So that said, my next question to you, what happens to Dave Gettleman at the end of the year?
Oh, Patty, that is the Cape Cod question of the day, I guess. We'll put it that way, because Dave has talked about retiring to Cape Cod, watching the Giants from afar, watching Daniel Jones' career unfold, from afar, and all of that. And I think right now, Patty, I mean, if you had to make the decision right now, it's very difficult to justify Dave Gettleman getting a fifth year. I mean, I do not blame Dave for everything that has happened, during the 4 years that he's been Giants GM, but it all goes on his record. The fact of the matter is, bottom line, we can argue about the reasons for the decisions in 2018. We can argue about what Daniel Jones is and what Daniel Jones isn't. We can argue about how good Andrew Thomas might eventually be. Bottom line is, Dave was brought in to right the ship. And right now, I don't know where the competition stands between the Giants and the Jets, but right now it's the Giants and the Jets that have the two worst records in football during Dave Gettleman's tenure as GM. And I don't know which one's worse at this point, but that's not a good thing, Patty. It's not a good thing at all, because progress on the field is something that we just record-wise haven't seen yet. And we, like I said, we can argue about this decision and that decision, but whatever the decisions have been, they haven't led to progress on the football field. And for me, it's so hard to justify bringing him back right now. Now, what happens if they go and have a good second half of the season? What happens if they go, let's say they go 5-3 the second half of the season and get to 8 wins, go 8-9 after a really rough start? Then I think maybe you have a real internal argument about what the Giants should do, because we know the Giants like the way that Dave Gettleman and Joe Judge work together. But it's just, if they don't win enough games, it's really hard to justify bringing Dave back.
Yeah, I agree. And I could see a scenario where even if they do have a successful second half of the season, maybe they mutually part at the end of the year. Dave can say, okay, you know what? The organization's left in a little better shape than how I found it. So I'm going to move on. This whole thing about Dave and Joe working well together, that's a valid point. But right now, Joe is still kind of a young head coach. And I don't know that he's necessarily in a position to where he can call the shots and say, okay, I want, my guy from 20 years ago when I worked in New England, or 10 years ago, I should say, when I worked in New England. I'm not so sure he has that clout. I think it will be considered, but at the end of the day, if Dave does move on, they'll hopefully make the right decision and the best decision. And that decision, by the way, I hope would not come from promoting somebody within, because at this point, I'd like to see the Giants get some fresh ideas, some fresh voices in there. You can only recycle this so much. It's if you think about it, Jerry and Dave came from the Ernie Accorsi tree, which was, Ernie was successful. Ernie came from George Young. At some point, I guess the potency, if you will, starts to wear out a little bit. So I would hope they would say, okay, you know what? We're just going in a totally different direction. No Kevin Abrams, no Ken Sternfield, no Mark Coons. We're going in a totally different direction and bringing in a fresh voice.
I would agree with that, Patty. I think that one of the things that the Giants get accused of by other people around the league, one of the things that you hear a lot isn't necessarily that the Giants are, behind the curve in terms of analytics or the way that they scout or all of that. But one of the things that you hear is that the Giants tend to overvalue their own personnel. I mean, Evan Engram perhaps being an example. And I do not know this for a fact, but the trade deadline just passed a couple of weeks ago. One of the things that I had read was that when teams initially started to call the New York Giants and try to find out if Evan Engram might be available at the trade deadline, was that the Giants said, yeah, sure, for a first-round draft pick. And if you're asking for a first-round pick for Evan Engram, then that's pie in the sky, and you really don't have a true sense of what the value of the player is.
I hope that's not true.
You and me both, Patty. You and me both, to be honest with you. But it's just one of those things where I agree with you that I don't want to see it be Kevin Abrams or Kyle O'Brien or whoever's in the organization, Chris Pettit, whoever the Giants might think it would be in line for that job. The Giants did not cast a wide net when they hired Dave Gettleman. The only other legitimate interview that they did was with Louis Riddick. The Giants need to figure out what it is that they want in a general manager, whether that's a guy that's got, connections with Joe Judge or what it might be. They need to figure out what it is that they want, and they need to cast a wide net around the NFL and go find it. They can't just say, well, we'll just hire the next guy up in line, in our own organization, because the performance just doesn't lend itself to any confidence that would work.
Agreed. And I think everybody's tired of it. I mean, loyalty is a great thing, but at the end of the day, if it's not getting you the results in a results oriented business, you got to rethink what you're doing, as hard as that is to say. But
when is the last time the Giants truly had an organizational turnaround?
Back in '79 when they hired
George Young, when they were more or less forced to go outside their comfort zone and hire George Young. Yeah. And there is a legitimate argument right now that they need a similar injection of new blood, new ideas, new thinking into the front office.
I would have no problem with that. I mean, look, Ernie was successful. Like I said, George was successful. Jerry had some success. Dave has done a few things right. You can't totally say that he's been a disaster, but they definitely need an infusion, at the end of the year. And it would not shock me if Dave Gettleman, regardless of what happens, if Dave and the Giants mutually part at the end of the season, win or lose. And we'll see. I know that'll make a lot of people happy, but at this point, the results aren't there, and you can't justify this moving forward. You just can't. But Ed, great stuff as always. Appreciate you coming on with me.
Thanks for having me on, Patty.